Hi, I'm comedy ventriloquist Steve Hewlett. There are many Steve Hewletts out there. There's an estate agent actually in Ireland. There used to be a well-known BBC journalist also, my doppelganger. Sadly, he's no longer with us. In this season of Eyes and Teeth, you will get to know me a little more through my love of comedy. I'll talk about my favourite stand-up comedians and improv comics, and maybe the odd ventriloquist, but most of all, this is about comedians behind the comedy, the one-liners, prop comics, clowns, comedy magicians, comedy jugglers, impressionists, puppeteers, and voice-over artists even. If you do comedy, I want to talk to you, and I want to get to know how your comedy really manifested itself. So here we are. I love comedy. I love to laugh. I love an original performer, a newly written joke or routine. I love to see something I've not seen before or heard before. The last comedian I saw live on stage was very recently, August 2020, just after the lockdown, in Bexhill actually. Eddie Izzard on the roof of the Bexhill Dillawar Pavilion. Now, what a comic to go back into the first show you saw after lockdown. That's a nice conversation. Start with Eddie Izzard, but he was phenomenal. But I mean, before him, the last comedian I saw was Jerry Seinfeld in London. And the next ticket I hold for the comedian is the London Palladium to see Ricky Gervais. So my standards are quite high for comedy. I have an eclectic taste in comedy as I do in music. So I love the Beach Boys, Van Morrison, Eminem, Kenny G, Gregory Porter, R.E.M., Jamiroquai. I'm open-minded. I'm not stuck to one genre, and it's the same for comedy. My favourite comics are Lee Evans. For me, he's at the top. You've got Ross Noble, Billy Connolly, Paul Merton, Lee Mack, Jack D, Sarah Millican, Tom Binns, a very, very new talent who's been out there over 20 years, but he is still new to people. And I enjoy hard-thinking comics, really, where they make you think while you're watching them, which is why I'm fascinated by comics like Stuart Lee and James Acaster. Growing up, I remember really enjoying the Grumbleweeds, Kenny Everett, Lenny Henry, the Young Ones, French and Saunders, Jasper Carrot, Phil Cole, Jimmy Cricket, Benny Hill, Little and Large, Cannon and Ball, the Crankies, Frank Carson, Mick Miller, Duncan Norvell, Morecambe and Wise, Les Dennis, Tommy Cooper, so many more that I'm just the sound of their names probably makes you smile. Even game shows we loved as a kid. Always watched them with my parents and my siblings. Sat around the telly because all the game shows were full of comedians. Hosted by Jim Bowen on Bullseye. There was Catchphrase with Roy Walker, Name That Tune with Tom O'Connor, Blankety Blank with Les Dawson, and Bob Monkhouse done every other show that was on. So from America, I love the stand-ups and movies as well, for people like Jim Carrey, who've done both, Robin Williams, Richard Pryor, Steve Martin, Stephen Wright. But the list goes on, and my mind is open to all sorts, as long as they make me laugh. Some comedians don't make me laugh.
Oh, controversial.
I'm not at all sporty, but if I did watch any sports, it would be the characters of those games I would be drawn to. For example, in football, I love to watch Gaza because he was a performer. In snooker, it was Alex Higgins, and in tennis, it was John McEnroe. I would only watch if they were playing. They have that unpredictability, those characters, that was just too good to miss, and I want to get, even just a little of that, some of my favourite comedians that I've admired or even worked with over the years. I'm so happy that over these interviews, and I've probably done about 28 to date, but not one of these comedians that I know have worked with or admire, a few of them I haven't even worked with, but not one of them has said, "Where's Arthur Lager?" They take me as an entertainer or as a performer or a comedy act, and that they don't say "get your dummy out," or they're taking me seriously actually while I'm doing the podcast, and I really respect them for that. So thank you guys for actually accepting me as I am without a dummy, because there is no dummies. There's no Arthur Lager sat near me. He's ready for the next gig in the back of the car. So this is just me learning about comedy through a lot of my favourites. I mean, when dating, a sense of humour is always important, and I laughed on a few dates, but the most I ever laughed was when I met Nina, my now wife and mother of our 2 children, Lola and Larissa. Nina's got a great sense of humour, and we've shared many tears of joy, making each other crease up. When we just started dating back in 2000, and I, being me, joked over the phone, I remember her saying, "Are you never serious?" And I replied, "When I want to be." And then I started to get a little bit more serious then, otherwise she probably would have dumped me. We got married, and I've not laughed since. Just kidding. But Nina has come out with some great lines, and not only for my stage show, but within actual disagreements. She would say to me, the ventriloquist, I don't think she had the pun in mind, but she actually has said it on a few occasions. You, Steve, need to have a conversation with yourself. So this first episode is called just that. You need to have a conversation with yourself. Steve Hewlett talks to Steve Hewlett. Welcome to episode 1 of Eyes and Teeth. Steve Hewlett, welcome to the show. Thank you. Where were you born? I was born in Basingstoke. There's nothing funny about that place, but if you were to describe it, then you would mention all the roundabouts, Martine's, the nightclub from the 90s, and probably the AA building on the way in. So who was the first comedian that you ever met? Well, Jimmy Townley was the ventriloquist, the first comedy person I ever met, really. I remember waving to Wurzel Gummidge, John Pertwee. He's a comedy character, isn't he? Comedy actor at that time. And I waved to him at the Basingstoke Carnival when I was about 7 years old. I remember that specifically. But apart from that, Jimmy Townley was the first comedy person. But I guess the first comedian I met on a holiday, actually. I went to stay with a family I became friends with in Gloucester, and they were called the McDonalds. And down the road from them, on the same road, was a comedian called Jerry Thomas. They introduced me to Jerry, and he knew I was a budding ventriloquist, so he offered to take me to a gig that night, actually. And I did. I went along, jumped in his car, and he took me to a marquee do. And backstage in the green room, I met up with another comedy act called Diamond and Leighton, a comedy duo. And all 3 of these pros that night looked after me and welcomed me into the business. And from then on, I always wanted to be around comedy. So who was the first comedian that you actually bought tickets to see? When I was at college, I was offered tickets to see Billy Connolly when I was 16. And I think I paid £50 for 2 tickets. And I went to the Apollo to see him with my mate Diddy from school. He was brilliant. I didn't understand much of what he was saying, but I got his accent. I just wasn't old enough to appreciate his routines at the time. But I watched the audience reactions a lot, and I loved what I was seeing. I knew I was in the presence of a comedy genius. Didn't you once roadie for Joe Pasquale? Wow, you've really done your homework, haven't you? You've done a lot of research on me. So, yeah, around the same time that Jimmy Townley started to teach me ventriloquism, probably a couple of years in when I was about 15, he asked if I wanted to roadie for Joe Pasquale. And one night I said I'd love to. So he asked Joe. Joe came down to pick me up in Basingstoke. And I jumped in his van. It was a little white van that he had. Or was it red? It was a little red van. And he just needed someone to trigger his tapes off during the act, which I actually did. The 3-hour drive to Rugby was brilliant. Joe just made me laugh a lot of the way. He was so good, though, giving me advice. But Jim said that Joe was a bit of a slow driver. So in his transit van in the early 90s, if I could find some small trees halfway through the journey to pick them up, hide them until this point, but pick them up and make them appear to go really slow past my window and say and I did find a couple of trees actually from like a train model shop in Basingstoke, and I did what Jimmy asked. Joe knew exactly instantly. Jim put me up to this. I went, "Oh, come on, speed up, Joe." And that was my breaking the ice moment, really. We're trying to be funny with Joe. And so actually during the show that night, I messed up one of his cues. I was doing his sound, and he hit me with a line, 2 million unemployed and there's a dickhead on the sound. And I remember that specifically. The crowd loved it, but I was really worried about messing up. And apparently it was just a godsend when things go wrong in a Joe show, because his lab ad-libbing is second to none, and he could always revert back to where he was in the show. So I remember Joe from the New Faces 1987 finals because he was in it with Jimmy Tamley, who ended up being my mentor.
Ice and Steve.
We were both ushers at Jimmy's wedding, and I worked backstage with Joe and helped him out with Jim's wedding gift, which was the hilarious comedy act Dave and Amos. I'd love to know a bit more about those guys. They had the place in hysterics. I've watched since Joe Pasquale's career in plays, musicals, pantomimes, royal varieties, to his own specials and guest spots on Des O'Connor, voiceover work, commercials, movies, game shows. Joe's one of the hardest working performers out there. I'm even reading his horror stories book right now and looking forward to re-watching him on his tour Some Others Do Have 'Em when we're back on the road again. He's so gifted. You actually made meeting comics a hobby. Is that true? Yeah, it was actually. I just wanted to be around the business. Once on the Isle of Wight, while I was roadieing for Jimmy, we'd often see acts on the Isle of Wight ferry about midnight returning back to the UK and, well, not the UK, but the mainland. One night Jimmy Jones was sat with us and we had a cup of tea, and I remember getting a picture with him, and I remember my dad playing Jimmy Jones tapes when I was a lot younger, and Derek and Clive and Chubby Brown, even Ned Kelly were favourites. Not the cowboy, there was a comedian called Ned Kelly. I just loved to meet comedians. And this was the spark that I needed to plan for the next few years, jumping on trains to meet comedians at the stage doors of theatres. And there was Ken Dodd, Dawn French, Jennifer Saunders, Brian Connolly, Rod Hull, with Imu, Rick Mail, Aid Edmondson, the Whose Line Is It Anyway team, Julian Clary, Little and Large, Michael Barrymore, Frank Carson, Phil Cole, Jasper Carrot, Hale and Pace, Grumbleweed, so many more. I just wanted to meet them, and I've got pictures with all of these guys. And some of them would stop and I'd tell them what I do. I really wanted them to know that I wanted to be in the business. And I guess I was looking for a step up or a way into the, not just into the stage door to chat with them, but I kind of was looking for a way in. I didn't know how to get into the business at the time. It was a hobby out of control, really. Some would have a photo and sign their name, bearing in mind I was like 14 to 18 years old when I did this, and didn't really have any spare money for tickets for their shows. I just travelled to meet them in hope of getting advice. Ken Dodd gave me just that. And Phil Cole was so nice and so pleased to hear I was a vent. He done his impression of Shorty Harris, which was Terry Rogers' character. And he actually, this was backstage, and Phil Cole was doing the face of a ventriloquist dummy. And it was just brilliant. And I was so fascinated that he gave me that time. I was grateful that Phil Cole was doing like 5 minutes of a private show for me. And also Gregor Fisher, his company from Ramsey Nesbitt were the nicest people. My sister Hayley came with me. This was at the Hexagon in Reading. And again, I didn't have tickets for the show, but Gregor himself asked if we were watching, and we said we didn't have tickets. Then he invited us both to meet the cast, and then called the company manager to show us to our royal box seats. So sometimes there were rewards. I just wanted to learn by watching comedy. I was still really shy as a person, and that showed a lot on stage well into my mid-20s. After I met Nina, she's always been the one to bring me out of my shell. And that really shows from my early theatre productions from 2000 up to 2004. You can see the transition of confidence.
Ooh, confidentiality.
Meeting these comedy heroes have made me want to be funny myself. I'm not naturally funny. I would always answer back my parents and stood outside the junior school once of the headmistress's office for attempting to be funny. And that was mimicking her hand gestures in gestures in assembly. But I had to work hard at being funny and create a kind of character for myself that would act against my dummies. So my reactions and facial expressions are that character. And I am becoming more creative in theatrical sense as I get older. My dad would say to me regularly, "You think life is a joke," and I guess I did. But now I'm married and have children. They've made me see the real world. I still think life is a joke, but I take it more seriously, as Nina would say. But there are bills to pay. People start dying around you, and you see that life isn't eternal. So Why not laugh every day? That's what I try and do, and my intentions are to bring people with me into my little jokey world. Where does your humour come from, Steve? Well, I think if I think about it, my parents are funny. My mum, Sharon, has a red nose, and my dad looks like Les Dawson. Just kidding. But my mum is very much a punster like me. She goes for the punchline if there is one, or she'll make one up if there isn't. But sometimes, if she doesn't do it, then I will. And we both, do a little laugh together. We laugh a lot, whether on the phone or together. She's got a good heart, my mum, and a great sense of humour. She's quite rude sometimes as well, and does jokes that I shouldn't be listening to, because she's my mum. But she's very cheeky, and sometimes that comes with the company she keeps. My dad. There's never the right time or place either, really. In the ambulance, when my dad was midway through a heart attack, my mum was there, and the paramedics asked Terry, my dad, how he felt. He replied, "It feels like my wife is on top of me." And my mum replied, "You should be so lucky." And she had the ambulance staff in stitches, so to speak. Speaking of my dad, he says funny things. For instance, he was at the doctor's with my mum just about 2 years ago in the doctor's surgery, and my dad told the doctor that he had recently had an autopsy. The doctor laughed and said, "Well, you're still alive, so you must mean biopsy." He has made us laugh a lot, my dad, but mainly because Terry Hewlett has undiagnosed Tourette's. He can't help it. He has no filter. And Chubby Brown is one of his favourite comics, so there's no surprise there.
Ice and Steve.
One brilliant story was the weekend of the Brian Clough breaking news after he hit a fan in the crowd. It was all over the TV and in the papers the next day. My dad had a knack for visual gags, and on this occasion, he was in the pub with his mate, and he said, "Knock, knock." His mate at the bar would say, "Who's there?" And my dad would shout Brian Clough and knocked his unsuspecting friend to the ground. I think he only done that gag once, though. Otherwise, he'll be locked away still. I remember him playing Derek and Clive to his mates when he returned from the pub or club. And we were not even teenagers, but he would be crying tears of laughter at the legendary pair, with their C's and F words. But I've always said that my dad has that undiagnosed Tourette's, and it's kind of second nature to him. I was an usher at the London Palladium in 1994, and on opening night of Lionel Bart's Oliver, Peter Cook approached me with his then wife, Lynn Chong, to buy 3 cartons of orange juice. I wish I had said more than, "That'll be £2.70, please." All I could think of was, "You are half of Derek and Clive," and would have loved to have quoted a piece from his archive, like, "How's Greta Garbo these days?" I would like to make one thing clear at this very outset, that is, when you speak of a train robbery, this involves no loss of train, merely what I like to call the contents of a train, which were pilfered. We haven't lost a train since 1946. I believe it was the year of the great snows when we mislaid a small one. And one more. One of the ways of being beaten by the system is to laugh at it. The brilliant Peter Cook. Steve, what about your other brothers and sisters? Are they funny? No, next question. I'm just kidding. You have done your research, because my sister Hayley sold me a dummy when I was 12, so it was probably her fault that I stuck at it. But my sister Karen dropped a brick on my head, which is why I was probably distracted at school. And David performed with Arthur Lager at my 40th birthday, and it was very funny. So they've all got their own ways. My siblings are very funny. We're always making comments and roasting each other on the WhatsApp group, but we are very close, and I guess that's why we can say pretty much anything we want and get away with it and still be friends at the end of the day. We share a lot of comedy clips and jokes with each other, like you do with your mates on WhatsApp. And comedy is a very strong bond between us. I actually had funny uncles too. My dad's cousin George really made us laugh as kids, and his uncle Peter as well. They were naturally funny men, as was our uncle Harry, married to my mum's sister Jane. He was a prankster, and more than anything, he just was always funny. He's still funny now. What was the last book you read? Funny I should ask me that, because I really, really enjoyed the last book. It was Lenny Henry's first instalment of memoirs, and I recommend it thoroughly. Who Am I Again? Not only is his story a huge lesson in growing up and not fitting in, but it also gives you an insight into how hard this very talented man got through his teens, working the social club circuit, summer seasons, pantomimes, and that's after winning the New Faces TV show, aged only 16 years old. I didn't know how much Lenny Henry had suffered so early in life with racism, and it breaks your heart to read his story, but to see him succeed in his work is amazing. I remember the Three of a Kind TV show, the Lenny Henry show, Comic Relief, his interviews on TV. I think I was too young for Tiswas, but I loved his characters. And age 15, I went to get tickets to see him after school one night with my friend Diddy Thomas, and the show had sold out. So I said to David I was going to hang around till after the show to try and meet him. We walked around the side of the Basingstoke Haymarket Theatre to the loading bay, and we could hear Lenny on stage. If you look between the big doors, the loading doors, you could actually see and hear Lenny in his bright red suit performing. And me and David took turns to watch through the comedy spy hole. We couldn't believe our luck. But when the show was over, out he came with his suit bag. And actually, I can't remember what he was holding, but I guess his red suit was in a bag. So I won't make the rest up. But Diddy and I introduced ourselves, and I told Lenny I was a ventriloquist and loved comedy. He stood there for about 15-20 minutes, giving me advice and asking us about us. He was so good to us with his time. A few years after meeting Lenny, I met Dawn French, and I told her Lenny was the nicest man in show business, and she replied, yes, he's lovely, isn't he? At the end of Lenny's book, though, he gives the ultimate priceless masterclass of notes in getting ready for entering the stand-up world with notes on. Like, number 1 would be a fan and consumer. Number 2, know the difference between being funny and telling jokes, because there is a difference. 3, performance. 4, craft. 5, mindset. 6, what to wear. 7, mic technique. 8, the grind, which is all the hard work that goes with it. 9, open mic. 10, bad habits. 11, interactivity. 12, TV. 13, the big break. He kind of breaks it down for you for you to go out there and not make mistakes. The end of Lenny Henry's book is just fantastic. I loved reading it. He's a legend, and I recommend watching his YouTube work as well. Buy his DVDs, books, Google him. And before that, look up Louis Theroux podcast, Grounded, the interview with Lenny Henry, recorded during the lockdown in 2020. It's great. You do impressions? No, I don't. No, you do? I've heard. Oh, I don't. Who told you that? My dad. Anyway, my dad loves it when I do an impression of Jeffro. I knew he'd done it when he was on the TV, so it was, wow, the dental pencils, he came to the toilet, said, what you doing in the toilet? Come over here, let me go to the toilet first. And he said, no, I'm going to the toilet. See, you go to the toilet, wait for me, go to the toilet first, see? And I would just talk about anything, but it was, if I just done a little bit of, for like 30 seconds of Jeffro, my dad would be in stitches, which is great. Nice to hear laughter. I should do a bit of Josh Widdicombe more recently. Hello, it's Josh. It's Josh Widdicombe. I've got a sitcom. My sitcom's called Josh. It's called Josh, my sitcom. No, my nan's not called Anne. She's not Anne Widdicombe. We're different Widdicombe's. My name's Josh, I've got a sitcom, I do panel shows. I don't know why I keep talking until I get out of breath and it sounds like I'm right nasally. I don't know why that is. Just listen to me, I don't know why I keep getting upset all the time. I keep shouting and I keep running out of breath. That's Josh Widdicombe. So, what well-known comedy names have you worked with? Well, I'll start with Tucker. Tucker is one of the earliest comedians that I worked with, like in 1997 or 98. I done one of my first showcases up in Ipswich, and Tucker was backstage, and he gave me a gag for one of my puppets, which was for a lamb chop. I'd done a tribute to Lamb Chop, and Tucker gave me this gag, and I thought, wow, this comic's really generous. And then I saw him again in 2000. We done a summer season at the Hippodrome Theatre, where incidentally I met my wife Nina. So that was in Eastbourne at the Hippodrome, and A Night to Remember. And it turned out to be a season to remember because I still live in Eastbourne today. So that was 20 years ago. So I really got to know Tucker throughout that season in 2000, and we just stayed in touch. I ended up doing a cruise at the end of that season with him. And then in 2004, he introduced me to Chroma Pier. So we went up to Chroma Pier, done a show, the Tucker show up there. I supported him. I remember the crew backstage saying, "Oh, you should come back and do your own show or do a season with us." So 2006, me and Tucker returned for the Christmas Cracker Chroma show, which was fantastic. And I remember staying at my mate's Eddie Bushell's house that season, just playing PlayStation. Every time we got back from the show, we just played PlayStation and just laughed. It's such a great laugh. And we ended up doing so many shows together, one-nighters, and Tucker would always put me on the bill of doing comedy clubs down at Worthing, his comedy night, which was the last resort. And I've done that about 5 times. And then we go and do more theatre work together. And I put Tucker on some of the shows I was putting on as well. So I started to produce some shows. But I always used to work with Tucker, see Tucker, talk to Tucker. And let me see, Tucker in 2004 started to host this TV show, which was on cable, and it was the New Variety Show, and Tucker was the host of it. And this show was put together by, I'm trying to think, we had Jethro, it was at Jethro's Club, and Richard Digance, Joe Pasquale, Chris Tarrant, Mike Osman. A lot of people put money into this project to get a brand new channel called, I think it was called The New Variety Show, and it had loads of different documentaries on comedy, and everybody mucked in to do it. So I was booked, thanks to Tucker, to go and do that first show. And I'd done my own stand-up, like 20-25 minutes in Jeffro's Club. Stormed it. It was brilliant. And they had like a second series, really. And then Tucker said, "Will you do the first one with me again?" So I went back and done the other half of my act, because I had about 50 minutes. So I just split it in 2. And the club were incredible. Such a great audience down there. Laysdown, I believe it was, down in Oakhampton in Devon. And yeah, Tucker was always good to me, always passing jobs on to me. I do butlins for him now because he's got an agency he works with. And one of the best jobs, undoubtedly, is working with Kenny G at the Royal Albert Hall. Tucker couldn't do these dates, so he booked me to do 3 of the dates of the Kenny G tour in 2016. But ending at the Royal Albert Hall is just incredible. So I thank Tucker for doing that. So I have to talk a lot about Tucker because we had like 18 years just constantly working together, and that started off in Eastbourne. And here I am back in Eastbourne now, talking about comics I've worked with. Over the years, I've worked with many, but when I was 20, I done a lunchtime comedy club in London, hosted by Dominic Holland. I only had 5 minutes, but it was brilliant. And a year later, I was in a talent competition, with all variety of acts. It was won by 2 singers, and I came second. Third was comedian Paul Eastwood, and fourth was Omid Djili. Back then, he was called the short, fat kebab owner's son. But in my 30s, I've worked with the great Ken Dodd, who we miss very much, Ricky Tomlinson at his club, and the Liverpool Empire. Les Wilson was a great comic, brilliant comic, a great variety comic from back in the day. I think he was in his mid-70s, maybe 80s, when he passed away just a few years ago. And I got to work with him about 10 years ago. I remember Les with great pleasure. He was fantastic. Ted Rogers I worked with on a cruise ship, and he blew me away. He was so topical and slick. Ted Rogers was so slick, just bang, bang, bang. You'd get all the gags out there. He was brilliant. David Copperfield, the comedian, was fantastic. So funny. Johnny Casson, a master of his craft. Brilliant, brilliant. And I only done one night with Johnny. I've done other shows with him since, but supported him at Barbican Theatre. Brian Conley, just the top of his game. Brian, all-rounder. But to do a couple of nights with him on his tour was was just incredible. And I've done a few one-nighters as well in variety shows with Brian. Working with Roy Hudd as himself, doing stories or hosting shows, or even playing Max Miller in shows, and being on the same bill with him was truly incredible. And Roy Hudd at Leeds City Variety, the theatre, doing the Good Old Days show, with him standing in the wings watching me and then saying, I'm going to make you a water rat, which if you know about the water rats, you know the history of who's been in the water rats. Many ventriloquists before me. You've got comedians, Les Dawson, Tommy Cooper, Charlie Chaplin, Laura and Hardy, so many great comics. Joe Pasquale is in there now, and it's just truly incredible. And I have Roy Hudd to thank, and we only lost Roy this year. So sad. More comics I've worked with, more alternative comics on the corporate circuit. I've worked with Hal Cottenden, who I absolutely love. I think he's one of the greatest comics out there today. I've done corporate with Rufus Hound, Stephen K. Amos, Fred Macaulay, Terry Alderton, Dilly Keane, Rob Beckett, Chrissy Rock. I had to follow Chrissy Rock. We all had 45 minutes to do a comedy weekend, and Chrissy done an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm waiting to go on, so they had to have a longer break because there's no way I could follow her after the material that she put out there. But she killed him. She's brilliant. And Phil Walker, I've worked with Phil. I've worked with so many comics, and I love watching these comics, whether they're on after me, before me, or well, that's it. There's only after or before you. You can't work during me, otherwise they're in my act. Anyway, yeah, Phil Walker's one of the great comics out there today as well. I'm proud to have stood in the wings with Ken Dodd, and that is a lasting memory, especially seeing him in the wings during my act. Actually having Ken Dodd watch me, and I come off and he'll give me advice. There's no better tuition you can get from a comedy mind than getting it from Ken Dodd after he's seen you work. I was to follow Victoria Wood once, and I was stood in the wings next to her waiting for her intro from Wing Calvin and Roy Hudd at Wilton's Music Hall one day, about 5 years ago. I was desperate to ask her hundreds of questions, but could see she was in her moment. I've been in the wings with Bruce Forsyth, and he was in the moment. But I'm standing there thinking, that is Bruce Forsyth, or this is Victoria Wood. And I'm thinking, wow. The stages or the people they've worked with, it's just truly incredible. And so when Victoria Wood was concentrating, or Brucey, you don't interrupt them. You know they're in that space before they go on, and I need that myself. So I respected that. And in the moment before her entrance, we just quipped a couple of times, and I wished her luck as she walked on. And she said thank you. Yeah, I love Victoria Wood.
Ice and Steve.
On Britain's Got Talent, who advised you on your act? My wife Nina. I run everything by her, and we looked at it, and she helped me with a few ideas, as well as helping me learn the song I sung with the Simon Cowell and Sunita, the Grease number, because I never knew the words. She run that by me and got it in my head. I was allocated a writer for the show and had a meeting, and he was honest that he was sure I didn't need any help, which was a compliment, I guess. On the day of the final, I wrote 2 or 3 new jokes before going live, and Nina said, was that wise? And that I shouldn't put them in. But I just knew that they would work within the show in that moment, because it was quite kind of topical. I was writing that week for the show. Nina instigated the Simon Cowell dummy, and she was completely right. So we did do the show together. She gave me the confidence to execute the gig. And the fact I added Simon and eventually Sunita to the show was brave enough, but I wouldn't have done it if they weren't going to be there. I knew Simon would be in the audience and thought it would get a laugh, but it exceeded the reaction I predicted. I hoped Sunita would be there, and when we crossed paths in the corridor before we went live, my excitement for the act shot through the roof. You can imagine. Did you have to write more material after the TV show success? Pulling out the dummies of people when they are sat in front of you is a winning formula, but I went on tour after the show, just writing for Simon Cowell, was a little bit more tricky because I knew he weren't going to be in the audience. He had a baby boy, so I added a little Eric doll around his neck, and that added a little special material for a couple of months, you know, and the audience loved seeing the Simon doll. But the Sunita dummy was more tricky to make work out of the studio environment. You got to work with Sunita after Britain's Got Talent. How did that come about? Well, after Britain's Got Talent, Sunita's manager called to say she loved the act and asked if I would join her on a new internet show at her home, watching X Factor with Sunita and friends. So I ended up guesting on there about 4 times. I just had to sit there with the Simon and Sunita characters and ad-lib throughout the show whilst we were watching X Factor live. We could comment. It was quite strange, but quite fun. Sunita and Jason were lovely, though. I really enjoyed the improvisation and the idea, but I'm not sure it really took off all round. I recorded a little chat with Sunita, and I really wanted to ask her about her experience of when that moment happened on Britain's Got Talent. We're going to ask Sunita herself what she really thought of Britain's Got Talent on the final. Now, you must remember that scene.
I do. I was there, wasn't I, Sunita?
You were there, darling. You were fabulous.
Oh, was it? Thank you.
So well.
Oh, yeah, we get on a lot, we do.
Okay.
You can't stand in, can you?
No.
No, I can't. Sunita,
Hello.
What did you really think when Simon brought you up onto the panel at that point? Because you wanted to say something, but
David Valian's got in the way, didn't he?
Got in the
he
way.
did get in the way. He was very funny.
He was so
thinking?
funny. Do you know what? I was genuinely in shock because I'd seen the real Sunita Puppet for the first time.
The Sunita or what?
The Sunita Puppet.
Oh,
So that freaked me out. I was just like, because I'd seen the Simon Cowell puppet before.
Oh, okay, a
obviously,
week
on
before,
the show.
yeah, okay.
But I wasn't expecting that at all. And then I was just processing
You had no
that when
idea.
he was just like, when he was about to say his thing, when he said, hang on a minute, and then just sort of pulled me up, I was like, oh my God.
Live TV as well. It must have
Live
been
TV,
a bit
yeah.
speechless
And,
thing.
I can't believe it. I was in the judge's seat and didn't manage to utter a word.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's in that moment, isn't it? I mean, I was gobsmacked because the audience were amazing that night. They were really, really good. So I didn't know what, really, I was standing next to Anthony Deck with
And I kept
these
laughing,
funny
I was
judges.
laughing and covering my mouth, and she was doing it as well back. And it's so
She was
weird
copying you.
because it was just like surreal.
Scary. She's good
Must be
looking,
like when
isn't
you
she?
two look at each other, it's like looking at yourself.
Yeah, so it's kind of a surreal moment seeing the puppet of yourself up on the stage. So obviously I wanted to know what Simon really thought of it. He said, I saw him backstage, he said it was very funny, but it must have been surreal for him to see. But the moment, I love watching it back and watching his face, because I think that's what made people in the studio laugh and people at home, was because he was laughing so much.
She was laughing.
It's a
so
shock
much.
factor. So it must have been the same thing for you on the
shocking.
final. It was.
Yeah, I mean, because it's crazy enough when someone just does an impersonation of your voice, for example, like Francine.
You couldn't do that, you couldn't do your voice. You
No,
can't do
but
silence
it was-
either, can you?
It's a comical cartoon version of the voices that we do, but I'm not
you
an impressionist.
Just,
You're an idiot.
the likenesses are so. I mean, it was just hilarious.
It was a great night, wasn't it? It was really good fun. Well, we'd like to thank you. We'd like to thank Sunita, the wonderful Sunita. And coming out of a show like Britain's Got Talent and going back on the road puts a lot of pressure on a comedy act to keep funny and maintain or exceed the comedy content. So you only get to perform 3 times 3 minutes material. So that's 9 minutes of act time in 2013 that I had on television. Apart from a couple of interviews, which isn't that much compared to a night at the Apollo spot. So it's easy to fill those 3-minute spots. But when there's nowhere to go after that show, you have to make your 45-minute show or 1 hour constantly entertaining and gripping for your new fans. You can't go out there and perform everything you've done on BGT and the rest of it being padded. You have to be ready, which is why I planned and wrote my own tour in 2014 and filmed my first DVD. I was so proud that I'd done it all myself. On that tour, I remember playing a theatre in the Midlands, and it had a studio next door with about 100 seats. I only had about 150 in my venue, and Rob Beckett was next door. He had about 80 in, and my tickets were about £5 more than his, and I was quite happy that my show seems to be selling okay. But that's the power of a TV show like Britain's Got Talent. It really is bigger than I knew it was, because people were coming out, people were buying tickets to see me work, and I'd worked for 20 years to get to that point. What has BGT brought you? I get the minor negatives out the way. There seems to be a stigma where Britain's Got Talent or talent show acts are concerned. I've noticed this coming out of the other end. It's a kind of snobbery from other people in the business, and I think it's because a lot of the acts that come through are novelty acts. They don't have more than 5 minutes of material or experience once the show is over. And we're pigeonholed into that box and feel like we have to prove ourselves all over again. I think that's why I managed to keep busy. I haven't stopped since I turned professional in 1997, but I knew that when I come out the other end of BGT, coming fourth, I had to grab every opportunity. If I was in the top 3, the tour, the DVD sales would have been offered to me. But because I came fourth, they managed me, but they didn't know what to do with me. So I had to take everything on myself. I had meetings and ideas, but just nothing came of it. So I managed to co-produce my own tour and film my own DVD. But I couldn't have done that without Jordan Productions. So Chris Jordan down at Eastbourne contacted me and said he'd like to sponsor the tour, so he did. We had a great time from Cornwall to Scotland in 42 theatres in 2014. Brilliant. And I used one of my best mates, Richard Griffin, the illusionist, on the show, so we had a blast. I was offered some great work in America and toured with the Osmonds in Canada and the UK. So many performers came from talent shows, like Roger de Courcy, Marty Kane, Little and Large, Lenny Henry, Michael Barrymore, Joe Pasquale, the Chuckle Brothers, Roy Walker, Mick Miller, Victoria Wood, Les Dennis, Jim Davidson, Billy Pearce, Paul Zerdin, Paul Zenon, Chubby Brown, the Mad Hatters, Bernie Flint, Frank Carson, Max Boyce, Pam Ayres, Les Dawson, Paul Daniels, and Lee Evans appeared on Opportunity Knocks in 1986 but didn't make it past the initial audition. So that is a whole list of comedy talent that you wouldn't have known come through talent competitions, but they did. So there's no shame. There's no shame at all at being in a talent competition. And I came fourth, which is actually quite a good result for a ventriloquist in the present day, becoming the wild card, the viewer's choice, to be in the final that year. Can I just say, I am the highest scoring wild card in BGT history, which is fourth place. No one's been higher in the top 3 as a wild card. I've been told that, and it's in the statistics on the internet. So I need to note that, just for my mum. For me, I loved it. It was brilliant. But I don't want it to be my only show reel. I've got so much more to give, and now I've got more experience and more love and passion. I'm ready now to have a new show reel. So BGT opened doors and a larger fan base. I wholeheartedly hold my head up high and just say I'm very proud of what it brought me. Who's your favourite comedian, Steve? I mentioned him earlier. It's Lee Evans. If you want one answer, then Lee is the result. He's just an incredible writer, performer, dedicated. And the way he finishes on a song that he's written and he plays, he teaches himself music as well. He oozes talent, but he also has got this beautiful essence of his father, Dave Evans. Dave Evans is just one of the greatest entertainers I've worked with. I miss him. I miss talking to him. He would phone me up just for chats, and I would stop by his on the way to gigs. If I was passing, and we'd go get fish and chips. Him and Dave and Shirley, Lee's mum and dad, were just like a double act. They wouldn't argue, that they would bicker, but Dave would be laughing and joking, and Shirley would come back with a joke. Then she'd tell him to shut up, and it would just be brilliant comedy banter, like they've written it for me, especially. It was just. But Shirley just gives me that little smile. You know, she knows when I think they've had an argument, it's getting a little bit heated, but she'll just give me that little smile, and then Dave would wink, and you kind of know it's their everyday banter. I've been blessed to have had a few conversations with Lee. His brother is funny, Wayne, as well. Dave Evans, over the years, probably about 11 years that I knew him on cruise ships, then we've done quite a few shows together. So I co-produced Re-Educating Archie in 2012, and I put Dave forward for the part of Max Bygraves and Harry Seacombe, and he just nailed it. For me, he was the best thing in that show. Not even Archie done it for me. It was Dave's performance in there, and Helen Ward Jackson. Their little bit of magic was just brilliant on the stage. And Helen played Hattie Jakes. They were fantastic together. But then Dave done his own set, as well as playing those people. He done his own set, brought his own style into the show, which was just genius. He's one of the funniest men I ever knew.
Mr. Dave Evans, give a big cheer, Dave Evans.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, thank you, Steve. Thank you. Yeah, well, it's been a nice. I've enjoyed it tonight. Have you? Yeah. It's been a nice show. It's been a nice show. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's nice. It's nice audience. Lovely audience. And it's nice to be here. My wife's with me. She's come with me. She's not in the room. She's in the car park over there. She's fitting a new gearbox in. Good as gold. And 52 years we've been married, 52 years now. Yeah, and after 52 years, to me, she still looks like a film star. Isn't that nice? Isn't that lovely? Jack Palance. But I love her to death. Not long ago now. She had a facelift the other week. I couldn't believe it. I don't like it much. It's not high enough. I can still see it. Anyway, she's all right. She's lovely. She's like my right arm to me, hairy and covered in tattoos. But anyway,
that was the wonderful Mr. Dave Evans, who we miss very much. So, Steve, before we go, we want you to define Steve Hewlett. Define Steve Hewlett? Well, I would just say that I have a true passion for the art that I practice and perform, and I respect those who pave the way for the next generation of events or performers. So I want to pay my respects, and this will show in my book in 2021. I want to bring original, hilarious, honest entertainment to the world out there, but it will be honest. It is a passion. And I want the audience to know that I'm having a great time up there. And I am their friend. I'm not there to upset. I'm there to make them smile. And if they can go away remembering Steve Hewlett with a smile on their face, then my job is done. That's why I love comedy. Comedy is so important to a ventriloquist act. It's not just all about puppets and technique. The comedy has to be different from others, but it has to work. And it is working. I've got away with it now for 25 years, so I'm hoping for another 25. At the end of each podcast, I'm now going to be finishing on a quote from a very funny person. And I've got a lovely one to start with. But leading into it, just need to mention that we're always looking down at our phones. You see kids, teenagers, even OAPs, everybody looks down at their phones now. We're all going to be ending up with curved backs and necks. No one's going to have a straight back. It's looking to be very scary for the future, and all caused by technology. Always looking down at phones. And now we're forced to look down on the pavements because of all the arrows. When you're walking around the shops or outside buildings, you have to adhere to the one-way systems. And so you need to follow an arrow here and there. And if you go the wrong way, you feel like a criminal because you get told off by the shop assistants for going the wrong way. So you can't look up, you can't walk, you can't just do your shopping. You need to follow the arrows or keep your 1 or 2 meter distance. So you're getting your tape measure out to do that between each person. But you need to look down to do that. I probably think we should all get on eBay and get ourselves a metal detector. While you're looking down, you might as well be earning something. But this quote comes from the late, great Sir Charles Chaplin. You'll never find a rainbow if you're looking down. It's a more positive vibe, isn't it? Let's stick with that one. I hope you enjoyed the first edition of Eyes and Teeth, produced by Steve Hewlett, written by Steve Hewlett, and hosted by Steve Hewlett. Music by Kevin Dean, vocals by Nina, Lola and Larissa Hewlett, and special guest Mr. Rich T. Thank you to my very special guests, Sunita and Dave Evans. See you next week on Eyes and Teeth with my special guest, comedian and author, Mr. Paul Adams.